Globalization and Leadership Webinar 2025. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. My name is Michael Addick, and in this session, I will be talking about managing local employees abroad. Maybe first of all, a quick introduction of myself, who I am. My name is Michael Addick. I'm a global consultant, trainer, and coach, originally from Germany. I've lived about 25 years, well, let's say 20 years in China continuously. And in the last 5 years, I've been traveling to China, every 3 to 6 months, so quite frequently. My background is quite diverse. For a long time, I used to work for Siemens in China. Later in this speech, I will also give a little case study on how Siemens is managing local talents in China, maybe as a good reference how to do it well. I was the head of automotive industry for Accenture for a few years, based in Shanghai and in Beijing as well. And then for also over 10 years now, I have been the owner and managing director of Tutuba, which is a global consulting firm. If you want to follow me, here are some QR codes, for example, WeChat, WhatsApp, and LinkedIn. Okay, about the topic. I did some research, and last year, China invested already over 1.1 thousand billion RMB worldwide. That is actually a 10%, more than 10% increase over the year before. So Chinese investments are increasing, and as Chinese companies are globalizing, naturally they will be facing a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people all over the world. So I would like to start the presentation with a statement: humanity is very diverse, and it's very colorful, and it is very beautiful. But of course, we will need to handle all these different diverse differences worldwide. And of course, most important message first is that appearance is the least important difference, especially when we work together, when we want to do business together, and we want to be successful together. So appearance is the least importance. The important factors are, of course, beliefs, values, behaviors, convictions, and so on. And for this matter, I always find that the Lewis model, created by Richard D. Lewis in 1996, is a very, very powerful reference and starting point, where we see it's a triangle, and we can start on the lower left side. He basically differentiates global cultures in 3 different main areas. The first one being linear active, the second one being multi-active, and the third one being reactive. And if you look into a little bit more detail, you will realize that probably a lot of the linear active are somewhere in North Europe, Northwest Europe, and of course countries that originated out of Europe, like the United States, for example, or Australia. We also see that multi-active cultures are South European or South American or Middle Eastern for the largest part. And then we have the reactive cultures, which again, quite visibly, you can see it quite well on the slide, are East Asia, Southeast Asia, starting with India here and starting with Singapore here. Now, what are the differences between them? They are summarized in the middle of the slide. The linear active are generally considered cool. Think about, probably you have a notion about what Germans are. Germans are considered to be more cool. Cool means maybe in the first approach a little bit cold, not as warm and hot like the South German was, South European or South European. More factual and more focused on planning. Multi-active are warmer, more emotional. Consider the speech here. We have the Italian gentleman with the hand signals that are so famous, maybe a bit more loud, more easygoing, you could say. And then we have the Asian, the reactive cultures, which are considered to be courteous, friendly, amiable, accommodating, trying to find benefits for everybody in a group, compromising and listening more than speaking. So I think this is a wonderful starting point to understand when you globalize your business, or when you, as a manager, are sent to some region in the world and have to work with the local employees there. Where are they on this map? And talking about map, there's also a map that you can draw. I just already mentioned geographic differences. And on this world map, you can easily see where the how to say, where those different dimensions, according to the Lewis model, are located on the world map. So a wonderful reference point from Lewis, the Lewis model. But why do we actually have to think about this at all? I mean, maybe it's a bit of a superfluous question. Why do we need to deal with cultural differences? However, I have now worked for over 25 years in the international stage, a lot of it in China, but also with companies all over the Asian region. I was also in the United States for a few times over these years. And I actually see that more often than not, companies make cultural, cross-cultural mistakes, or leaders, managers of international companies make cross-cultural mistakes. And so it seems important to remember or remind you as an audience, and anybody who likes to listen, why this is so important. So we see here the typical change curve, which is applied for so many things, adapted from originally Kubler-Ross in 1969, based on a very different topic, but applicable. So we have a change curve, and we can have a starting point of either an excitement or idealism. So think about your company is investing in a new location, in a different country. Naturally, the people who will be sent there most likely have some level of excitement. They have a new opportunity in their career. They also have an idealism. They want to do a good job. They want to succeed with themselves and with the business. And also the people that will be hired by the company that invests in that location will also have an excitement and idealism, because they get a new job, they get a new role, they work maybe with a new exciting technology. But there is also an alternative starting point. Think about a company going abroad and acquiring an existing business. That happens quite often, right? Nowadays, also Chinese companies are going abroad, and they will be acquiring shares or even buy out the original owners of an existing business. And so the local employees will maybe be in a state of shock and are afraid, right? Oh, why are we being bought out? What will the future for the company be? What will my future be? So this is a potential starting point for international investment. And the natural change curve is there will always be disappointments. There will always be misunderstanding, confusion. Things, you go with your business abroad, you will naturally implement different rules, rules that are normal for your headquarter company, but for the subsidiary, maybe these rules are new. You will try as much as you can to have a smooth communication, but maybe there will be misunderstandings, and misunderstandings can, of course, also lead to confusion and disappointment. And now, if we are not aware that a lot of these disappointments, confusions, misunderstandings, mistakes that are being made are based also to a large extent on the cultural differences between the parties involved, this all can lead to frustration, right? And frustration can be either the local employees will quit their job, go back to their own country's businesses or different business. They will run away, so you will have high fluctuation with your team, or it's yourself, or it's the manager who is being sent from headquarters to that location that says, I cannot deal with this. I have also seen in the past managers, leaders, or young talents that have been sent to Asia to fulfill a role. They came with a lot of idealism. They had a certain passion to succeed in Asia, and they realized they cannot handle the culture. That's not the fault of the culture of Asia, that's not the fault of the individual, but it is the inability of bridging across these cultural differences. And in the worst case, of course, the entire business could shut down. I actually have an example for that. So the objective of intercultural understanding is, of course, to at least bridge this potential gap of and of course reduce the likelihood of failure, but rather have a smoother path where cross-cultural or cultural understanding plus the right strategies around it to create success for the business, but also success for you as then international managers. So a good reminder why we should do that. And then let's say, in addition to this, coupled to this, a wonderful overview of Milton J. Bennett, created also in 1986, where he describes the different degrees, the levels of degrees of cross-cultural competence and adaptation, starting with ethnocentricity on the left side and with ethno-relativity on the right side. And then we have steps going through there. Let me go step by step. As the headline says, denial is not, let's say, the right answer, but denial is often a natural mechanism, especially on the business side. The business will always be focused on their product, on their processes, on their organization and hierarchy, their rules and regulations. An organization can easily fall into the trap of saying we have been successful in our home market. Why should we not be successful in another market? Culture, what is culture? Maybe in the marketing, we need to think a bit about culture. So we deny that there is actually a significance to cultural difference. Maybe even worse is the defense level, which I have also observed quite a few times. When we go to another culture, we go in another culture with our existing values, with our existing company behaviors and also rules. And every time we hit a problem where maybe we feel that the host country people do not follow our way of working, we become defensive and say, hey, this works perfect in our culture. This is what we always do, and so on and so on. It should work here too. And rather than bridging, this may create actually more how do you say that, discontent, more unhappiness. So very careful about being defensive. And however, what I personally have observed the most is actually minimization. Minimization being that this attitude that a little bit like cultural differences do not matter, but more like, yes, there are cultural differences, but we are well established as a company with good processes, or we as managers, leaders are highly educated and very open-minded, so we can easily handle cultural differences. That's a good attitude to start with, but if we, how to say, underplay the role of communication and in cultural differences, we may fall into pitfalls of cross-cultural misunderstanding over and over again. So that in that way, Milton Bennett says the best steps forward for success for the business, but also, of course, for success for the individual manager is adaptation. Also, let's say first acceptance. Yes, there are cultural differences, and we need to deal with these cultural differences. We cannot just ignore them, proactively deal with them, and leading to the level of adaptation where our international team, that means the people we are sending to the location abroad are adapted to local culture. They understand the local culture and can, yeah, adapt to different situation appropriately, with the final goal of integration, where our global subsidiary is already recognized as actually a local organization in the local market. Maybe also a number of the leadership team are already local employees, so giving our organization, which is originally foreign in this market, now becomes a local player. I have two examples, or two, how to say, four examples in two dimensions. On the upper left side, I show two failures. One is Walmart. You're probably familiar with the US retail group, Walmart. This is quite a while ago. I think it was in the 80s. Walmart acquired a German retailer, a quite well-known retail group in Germany. And instead of adapting to the local circumstance, in this case, a little bit more adapting to the local consumer behavior, Walmart tried to implement 100% their own way of doing. Also, they sent the entire leadership team from the United States to Germany and did not hire any local leaders at all. So trying to bring in their own ways of doing in a foreign market, which actually led to failure and exit. You will not find Walmart in Germany, and you will also not find them as an owner of a retail group. Home Depot is another example. Home Depot was for a while quite active in China. I think nowadays, if I'm not mistaken, you will not find Home Depot in China anymore. They quit the market for various reasons, also not able to adapt to local culture. From my point of view, two success cases are here at Siemens on the lower right. We have Siemens. Siemens, later I will cite that again, has been working with and in China for over 150 years. But even more, I think Volkswagen, with their, especially with their joint ventures in Shanghai, like Volkswagen and FAW's Volkswagen, are fully recognized local players. They are so different, they are so separated from headquarters in Wolfsburg, Germany. You could call them their own company, and they operate with their own financial backing and with their own local teams, of course mixed teams, but very successfully. Also, although we know Volkswagen is right now going through a big, how to say, transition, I think China is a success factor. If I have the number correct, I think it was just last week that FAW Volkswagen announced they would invest another, I don't know, $1 billion in R&D or $1 million in R&D in China. So the future is clear. So wonderful model to see how we should adapt gradually to local market and thereby become more successful working with local employees abroad. Try to avoid denial. Try to recognize for yourself, are you actually accepting the differences and then adapting to it, or are you just minimizing? For me, this is actually quite a step, but it needs your, how to say, open mind and proactive thinking. Now, how do we actually adapt to cross-cultural differences? The good news, this is not rocket science at all. It is actually just a two-step process. Very simple, but we need to start with ourselves. As with every improvement, business improvement or self-improvement, we will need to start with awareness. Awareness about our own values, convictions, also our own behaviors in different situations. How do we work, communicate, interact with people when we are in a normal mood? How do we interact with them when we want something from them? or convince them, or how do we interact with them when we are stressed or even unhappy? Because especially in these extreme areas, we are very excited about something, or we are very sad or very angry about something, then usually our deep cultural values will come to the open, and we will either communicate appropriately if we can manage this well, or we will be totally inappropriate if we don't handle it well. Think about, I am a German. If I'm very upset in Germany, I would very directly speak to somebody and say, I'm upset right now. I'm not happy with this. You need to fix it now. Now, put me in a reactive culture like Japan, and I would speak to a Japanese person or group like that. What would be happening? Because over there we are in a more quiet and a more amiable environment where a direct speech like that is not appreciated. So I need to first understand myself, and I can use the culture, my original culture, as a basis for that. Then I need to develop strategies. How do I adapt, especially what I just said? I would want to convince others. How should I approach others? I am not happy. Nobody can blame me for not being happy. For example, when we missed a project deadline, maybe I have the right to be unhappy, but how do I deliver the message that I'm not happy and that we want to change something? That's a strategy. And I can go back to that world map based on the Lewis model that will give me an indication how should I maybe interact with the local counterparts or local employees. And based on the strategies, I will then have to develop my skills. And this basically then increases my intercultural competence. And we can apply this to us as international managers, leaders, personally to our own person, but we can also apply this to our organization, right? When we know we want to invest or increase our investment in a foreign market somewhere as a company, we can do exactly the same thing, build awareness about our own base culture, our own values and usual behaviors, organizational behaviors, build the strategies and skills, and then we will be more successful, more competent in being successful in that market that we want to grow in. So not rocket science, but it requires us to do it. And in order to do it and do this awareness assessment and develop the skills and strategies, we need to first maybe also think back and ask the question, what is actually culture? What is culture? There are quite a few sources. The classical cultural definitions have been created by Hofstede, Gert Hofstede, already quite early, probably about, what is it, 20, almost 50 years ago, maybe even more, and Trompenas. These are quite standard models for what is culture. And the first one is culture defines the accepted values, the customs, the attitudes, and the behaviors of a group that they have developed to survive and thrive. Culture is based on history, how this group has over time evolved and developed. Much more important than that is that culture is always a filter through which we perceive and evaluate information, and especially through which we make judgments. And that's where the danger lies on both sides, right? On your side, as an international manager going to a location abroad, but also to the local employees, the local people working with your companies, also local suppliers and local customers. You can go there and you observe the way that your employees are working, and you think it's wrong. that is a judgment, right? They are doing it in a certain way, and your initial immediate response is, that's wrong, I want to change this. And that can, of course, happen on the other side of the equation as well. So very careful about the judgment. And also important is that we always need to consider that these behaviors and attitudes in that culture are considered normal within that group. That again means, remember the picture of Bennett Milton when we say defense, we go to a foreign culture and we see some behaviors and we judge. We say that's weird, that's wrong, that is not, I don't like it, right? That's our own personal opinion and based perhaps on our own culture, but within that host culture where we are now, this behavior may be normal. So it's not our right to judge. We need to just understand and then understand how can we judge. Sorry, excuse me, not judge, adapt, adapt to it. Okay, and also an important question is, what is the purpose of culture? In a way, I already explained it on the previous page, but Edgar Schein in 2010, I think he summarized this very well. He says, culture is the way in which a group of people solves problems and reconciles dilemmas. So the most important message here is the culture has been developed by this group of people in order to survive and thrive, right? And survival requires solving of problems and also reconciling dilemmas. Some examples, right? We know in Japan there is a strong group focus, loyalty, team loyalty, loyalty to a group is very important in Japan. And the rituals of shame, even up to today, the rituals of shame are very important. So Japan defined we can survive the best in our culture with these traits. In the US, we know individualism is very highly valued, and freedom now with the recent election and inauguration of the new president. The new president is certainly somebody who puts freedom above many other values that had been developed over the last few years. Swedes have developed consensus building as a survival method. So if if you are working with a group of Swedes in Sweden, trying to, for example, make a decision in a department for a new strategy, you cannot do this top down. You will have to involve all the players involved in this and build a consensus. Everybody has to agree. That's how they have defined it. And in Germany or Switzerland, generally speaking, we have developed the trait of direct speech. We have a problem, we speak out the problem just as brutal as it is, and then everybody can work on this, which doesn't work in other cultures because it might be considered offensive. So a wonderful definition of why there is actually culture. And it also reminds us that culture is not only a minor matter, but it really does also play a main role. Often, you may have seen this in the past also for other analogies, often the iceberg where once the 6/7 of the iceberg is underwater and 1/7 is above the waterline, is often used as an analogy of culture because not only my first slide, appearance is not everything, but also behaviors are not everything, right? We can easily observe behaviors. Is somebody very outspoken, loud, opinionated, or is somebody very quiet, listening, not really sharing opinion? Is somebody working closely with a group at all times, or rather prefers to has in his or her own corner office. These are behaviors we can observe. This is, however, only the surface. So some examples for culture, cultural trait on the surface we can observe are, for example, of course, language. It is the behaviors that I just described, or also customs, festivals, maybe religious um, religious events. How do we meet with our family? Uh, Music concerts, styles of music, and so on and so on. I think that is pretty straightforward. However, these are just the surface, just what we can observe, but they are basically guided by something that is not as easily seen from on the surface. These are the underlying rules, right? The rules how people should behave with each other. They can be written, right, in regulations and rule books and in laws, but they can also be unwritten, culturally inherited, very typical way, like in Asia, the value of the family, the value of the elderly, the age, maybe even the gender differences. These are rules that are actually not written down, but they exist. There are notions, ideas about certain concepts that we have about life, about relationships, about family, the importance of work, the importance of money, and so on and so on. Attitudes, yeah. How do we think about um, different things that are happening, convictions, and very deep in our heart, mind, our true beliefs, right? What do we really believe in? So what does it mean? Cross-cultural understanding. On the one hand, if you remember the two-step process to building cross-cultural competence, on the one hand is easy, it's only a two-step process, but the devil, of course, is in the detail. That means if we only rely on our observation of the surface, we may be missing a lot. And also this may lead to judgment, right? We can, as I said before, observe behaviors and then judge them in right or wrong, which in any case we shouldn't do. I will mention that a little bit later, but we can judge, and we do judge because we do not understand the depths of it. And so the complication is to better understand the true deep level culture of the host country where we want to invest or we want to be placed as a manager. Beliefs and values are basically regulating the surface. These are just examples, right? There are many other examples for both ends, but today, for the purpose of this presentation, this is supposed to give you an indication what we are looking at. So the starting point, and when we come back to that point, this two-step process, as you saw before, is to compare the two cultures, and we can say, where's the gap, right? We want to identify the gap, and we can observe the differences first on the surface in terms of language is easy, but language also explains a lot about culture, the behaviors, and so on. But even better, maybe to also identify what's actually similar, right? Many cultures, most cultures also value family. That could be a starting point. Many cultures actually do value work and also advancement in work and success. That can be a starting point. In the core, I think all humans are the same, right? So let's start with the similarities, work through the differences. But then very important is to understand as a company, but also as an individual manager, what the implications are. The implications, for example, to go back what I mentioned earlier, if I am not happy about a project result or the project status, and I, as a German, would say, I'm not happy with this. We should have done it different. Why didn't you pay attention to that? And this could be potentially offensive to the local employee. I will not solve the problem. I make the problem perhaps even worse, right? Maybe I will not be able to work with this person effectively anymore. So we need to think about, okay, now we do have such a problem. What is the appropriate way of communicating that problem and making the other person understand that this is a problem, and then go to the problem solving stage, right? So we need to proactively think about what are the implications and how do I behave different. Another good and fitting to this, as we have to think about the implications of differences, those differences, the ICAM dimensions of cultural differences are very valuable. They give an indication how different cultures may deal with certain important aspects in life. The origin is from Geert Hofstede. As I mentioned, many decades ago, Geert Hofstede defined originally 4 dimensions, then increased the dimensions to another 5th, the time, and left it at the 5th. ICAM has developed this into an 8-dimensional model to be more complete. And it looks at, as I said, 8 different dimensions, starting with hierarchy. And hierarchy here means both degrees of empowerment. That means, is it more top-down or is it more consensus? It also describes the expectation of managers uh, in regards to their power of decision-making, and the expectations of the organization to be involved or not involved in the decision-making. That is hierarchy. The second is the group, right? And in the decision-making, a little bit aligned to the hierarchy, the more clear definition of the group is either we value individualism more, right? I want to be responsible for my own life, for my own action. Don't give me too many rules. Don't restrict my movement too much. I will also be responsible if I am in the face of failure. Or we are more group-oriented. Decisions are made in a group. Everybody has to adhere to defined group rules. People who are outside, who act outside of these group rules will be shunned almost. So group focus. Relationships. Relationships meaning basically how trust is established. Is it more technical? Is it more based on merit, more based on past achievements, education, or is it more based on the personal relationship, the trust between each other as persons, irregardless whether there is any education behind it, any status behind it? So these two ends. Communication, I mentioned that before, can be direct or indirect. Then time, also very important. You know, I'm German, and German have the, how to say, stigma of always being on time. I can tell you very clearly this is actually not fully true. Also for Germans, there is some flexibility or to be on time or not, depending on how they manage time or how important it is for them. But what is definitely true in terms of how we look at time is if we have defined a deadline, if we have defined a date for something, then we will expect that this deadline is met. So the deadline, and that is the priority, to meet the timeline is more important than perhaps to meet the objective. Whereas other cultures, for example, also the American culture, US American culture, to meet an objective is more important than to meet a time, a deadline, a timeline. And so even between Germany and USA, there is actually a cultural divide, a cultural gap in terms of time, where we Germans may consider a US American approach to a project a little bit messy rather than what we prefer. The sixth one is control, and control means how do we deal with risks, both what is our risk tolerance. Again, citing the United States, if we see there is a lot of individualism and there is a lot of startup energy. We look at Silicon Valley, we see all the global big firms like Google and Amazon and so on. There is a lot of tolerance for risk. And risk handling means, am I personally or also as a company, we are responsible to manage our risks, or do we expect more strong rules, regulations, and oversight, for example, by the government to manage risks? As I mentioned earlier, people in the US will value individualism a lot and may actually not like a lot of state intervention, whereas in Europe, North Europe, we like to live in a social security system, so maybe there is a bit more tolerance to state intervention. Second to last is formality. We have cultures where formal protocol following protocols are still quite important, especially when we are in, for example, company to company negotiations, company to government negotiations, government interactions, more protocol. If you are Chinese, you will know that attending government meetings are quite protocolized, also in Japan. In Germany, we have the formal address, the Sie, yeah, the formal you, whereas in the United States, you don't have this formal you at all. So we have different cultures with different formalities. And finally, we have the motivation, why people work or what they value in their work more. In their life, what they value more in their life. There is the one end, which is status. You could also put money and status together. Status is more important than work-life balance. And maybe in Europe, but even I think with the young generation in China, in some places in China, the value of work-life balance is becoming more important than it used to be. This last sentence also is a signal that culture is not a fixed point. Maybe I show this on the next slide. So these 8 dimensions are basically on 2 ends on a progressive bar from left to right. And the important message is, first of all, even though here I show the example of China and Germany, they look like fixed points, but over time, those cultural dimensions can also shift their position. I still put, for the demonstration purpose, status as very high on the China side. Unfortunately, I cannot interact with you, so otherwise I would ask you for your opinion. But that was how we looked at China in terms of motivation in the past. But with the young generation, maybe there is actually a gradual shift more towards balance. I was actually not quite sure about the balance, about motivation for Germany. Generally, I think there is much more balance requirement in Germany. Now we are even speaking about this 30-hour week, right? We came from Saturday working, then to Friday 40-hour, Monday to Friday 40-hour, then to a 35-hour. Now we talk about 30-hour week. So that is an indication that motivation is more on the balance side, in this case, Germany. So there are pictures on the internet that show different countries. Actually, RW3 offers this also as a tool, but it costs money, where you can see different countries where they are here. But I think for the purpose of this presentation, when we share this with you, you can use it and then do deeper study in the country where you will be placed or where your company is, how to say, going to invest or is invested. Share some examples. I already verbally shared a few examples with you. So a little bit quick through this one, hierarchy, but also very important to observe this. For example, German employees will always be expecting to be involved in decision making. So if you come from a high hierarchy, top-down culture, and you expect the people to just follow orders, you will have a hard time in Germany. Even maybe not the intern, but even the trainee may have an opinion that wants to be heard. I mentioned the Swedish already, that the Swedish expect consensus building. Again, a top-down rule will not solve the problem, it will create more problems, right? Oops, that was too fast. Japanese value team loyalty, we know this, whereas US American appreciate individuality. In terms of relationships, I think in Germany, but also in Singapore, there is a lot of judgment in terms of the relationship, in terms of merit, right? Where you from, what education do you have, on what level in your professionalism, in your professional skills are you? Whereas maybe Chinese, but also in my observation, Saudi Arabian are judging more on personal relationship, personal, how do you say that? Do we like each other or not, right? To make it simple. Communication, the common answer in Germany is yes or no. And I tell you very truthful, as I lived over 20 years on end in China, I have become to not appreciate the German direct style, because even I, after those years, 20 years, feel I go to, for example, a government office or to a store and I get a very direct no. I find that very offensive, but it's my own culture, so I have to get over it. China is changing. Again, I cannot interact with you. Maybe my experience is already dated, especially in the centers like Shanghai, Beijing, Shenzhen, and so on, where there is more business mind. There is more directness now than there used to be. But in the early days, 2000s, there was a lot of maybe, right? When I was working in Siemens, Jochenang, maybe which other Germans that are not me are in project work find offensive because they want to have a clear answer, right? Are we on time with the project or not? Maybe, yes. So different styles. Till time, I already mentioned that before. I think I don't need to repeat this. It's exactly what I said before. Also control. I believe I didn't see the latest statistics, but for a long time, Chinese people had the highest saving rate worldwide. So Chinese were the ones that put the most of their money away on savings. Very good attitude. Obviously, US Americans are very much focused or credit finance. And I also mentioned that some cultures do not appreciate too much external intervention. Formality, also I mentioned already, formal form of address, whereas in North and South America we have actually less formality than in others. And finally, work-life balance has become an integral culture in most European cultures, in European countries' cultures nowadays. Maybe wealth and status are still more important in many countries in Asia. So once again, these 8 dimensions in a good overview and some examples how to work. Running a bit out of time, so I'm trying to speed up on this. I have some real life examples. For example, this is myself 20 years ago. I was just starting in China as a junior manager, team leader, and I had the first time a team also with 100% Chinese employees. And to cut it short, I did not succeed to have that employee follow through with the task, because I was originally expecting that I would give a task. If the person does not have the skill to do the task and finds a problem, the person would come back to me and say, hello, Michael, I don't know how to do this. But we have the issue here of hierarchy and communication. Communication in China, especially those days, very indirect. So the person did not dare to tell me clearly that she couldn't do this job. And she also didn't feel empowered to speak up. So clearly a management mistake on my side, but also a very clear indication of those cross-cultural differences. Another example also in Asia is the expectation of promotion based on an achieved degree. Somebody reached an MBA, master degree, and after just a couple of years work at a famous company, expected the management at a very young age with very little work experience to be promoted to a manager position, and shows that the motivation here was clearly on status, clearly on showing progress on the career side, but not really focusing on where we as Europeans, maybe Germans, North Europeans, focus more on the merit, right? Just having a master does not maybe qualify you to be a manager. You need to also have very solid work experience, maybe a little bit sub-leadership experience. So again, a cultural difference expectation. Just recently, I was told about an example of a Chinese company that invested in an Eastern European, but however, a EU member country, and expected that the working hours in that country in Europe would be matched to the standard working hours in the headquarters in China. The organization, the local organization, did not accept that, and they actually had to cite that by EU rules and regulations, what they were trying to do was actually illegal. So in the EU, to have this working hour structure was actually illegal. I think this Chinese organization should spend a bit more time in actually studying the local regulations. But again, this is a cultural expectation as well. Hierarchy maybe in China more profound, more important. So we are the headquarter, we are the managers, we tell the organization to work these working hours, you have to follow our rule. Whereas in the EU, there is maybe a bit more focus also on the rights of the labor. Anyway, EU, a little bit overly bureaucratic, to be honest. And the final example on this page is actually a a French company in German retail. However, I was doing a leadership course with their German store managers. And that is very interesting because there is a cultural difference between, let's say, older generations and younger generations. In this case, similar to this, when the employees work in the retail store, you can say the expectation is that the doors of the store will be open on time, let's say 8 a.m. in the morning, so that the first customers can immediately enter the store. But the employees, some employees, and their work-life balance comes into play, refuse to be on site before 8 a.m. because their work contracts only say 8 to 4 or 8 to 4. So even within generations, even within the same country, you can have also cultural differences. And that is the motivation here in this case between status and uh, work-life balance. There's another view on culture that is quite similar to the Lewis model. The main importance is we have low context cultures and we have high context cultures. In the low context culture, the rules are clearly written down, speech is more direct, everything is spelled out explicitly. In high culture countries, such as the typical Asian countries, but also South European, South American, Central American, many of the rules are actually implicit. Many rules are internalized and indirect. So this is another way of differentiating. Um, in order to make time, I will quickly go through this. There is another complexity to culture that culture actually consists of different bases and origins. Of course, we talked a lot about the regional and the national culture, but of course, everybody is different. Our different families and parents and grandparents also all raised us a little bit different. That is also very important. We cannot say every German is exactly the same, every Chinese, every Japanese is exactly the same. Every person has their own personal beliefs and individuality. And of course, we have corporate culture as well. And especially when your company, when you are acquiring a business abroad, where the original company will be still a part of your organization, corporate cultures also clash. So we have to look at all these three dimensions. So the final part is how do we deal with it as leaders and organizations, right? Cut it short, yes, we understand there are cultural differences, but we also need to behave differently. Otherwise, it's meaningless, right? We cannot stop at awareness. We have to do something. And the way of doing it is to understand our own culture, our preferred behavior. What do we prefer in terms of communication, hierarchy, and so on? What is the style of the host country we will be in? And so how do we adopt, right? If our usual way is direct speech, maybe, and in the host country it is indirect speech, can we scale down on our direct approach and find a more indirect way? If we need to build local relationships first in order to build trust, then we need to spend time and effort on building those relationships. So it's a conscious strategy that we develop, right? And here we will, I think, also share the PPT with you. The first step, as already said before, build awareness of your own culture, recognize that your own culture acts as a filter that makes you judge, and you need to try to avoid to judge. So recognize that and recognize that it's normal that different cultures have different characteristics. There is no right or wrong, there is only difference, right? Recognize this. And of course, if you invest or you, as a manager, represent an investment in a global location, you will have to spend time on the regional and local laws, rules and regulations. When you work with the employees, the local talent in those areas, regulations, of course, are very important to understand. That's the first step. Try to look into, put yourself in their position, right? What is their perspective? Because you, as their manager, are also foreign. You also have an odd culture, and there may be fear, there may be apprehension about these differences. And so put yourself in their perspective in order to adapt your style. And to end this point is, again, in cultural differences, there is no right or wrong. I said that deliberately 3 times, I think, today. It's very important. There are only differences. And different cultural traits actually have all their own right to exist, right? The golden rule is avoid defending your own culture, your own approach. There is not only one best. Your way is not the only and best way. There are different other ways to solve problems. So finding the middle ground or compromise is the right approach for successful intercultural leadership. I have a case study here, but I want to end this because I'm running out of time. I want to end with the conclusion of this case study. And when we share the PPT with you, then you can read through it. I think Siemens Limited China was very successful in combining typical German values that are written down there and behaviors with typical Chinese values and behaviors into becoming a very good local successful organization. Siemens China, Siemens has worked in China and with China for over 150 years successfully. So I think studying how they do that can be really a good way of success for yourself as an individual manager, but also for your business, and also some top tips that will be there for you in the PPT. And because I have been given 1 hour, I would like to end this webinar segment of the Globalization and Leadership webinar 2025 for you. And thank you very much for your participation. You may connect with us by this QR code. Thank you very much, and have fun with the rest of the program. Thank you.